Session. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to today's Wednesday webinar. I don't know about you, but I can't believe it's September 10th already. And given that it's September, it means it's time to start thinking about filing the FAFSA. So today's session is on helping your students get ready to file the 26-27 FAFSA. I'm Mila Tappan. I do have a new title. I am the Education Affordability Content and Training Manager. And with me today is one of our awesome education affordability, these are all new titles, education affordability and financial wellness counselors, Karen Parson. So Karen is here with me today, and she will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. If you do have questions, we prefer you put them in the Q&A, please, because it's a lot easier for us to keep track of them. So Karen will be watching those, and I will stop periodically to see what questions we have. So please share your thoughts. This session is being recorded, and it will be sent to you in the next couple days, the link to the recording as well as a copy of the PDF of the PowerPoint. And that will be sent to everybody who registered. And that's typical of how we do our Wednesday webinars. We know things get busy, but we do always share them after the fact, and we do post them on YouTube as well. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about our topics for today. We are going to talk about federal student aid accounts, known as FSA IDs, although we're phasing out that language because the feds are phasing out that language. We're going to talk about building a list of schools and how important that is for students to do. We're going to provide some resources to help understand the process and encourage those important conversations that we want students and parents to be having. And we're then going to talk about some of the challenging situations that students face, because the FAFSA actually is really accommodating to some of these situations. So we want you to know that. And then we are going to share ways that FAME can help. So with that, I also wanted to say that we want to stay connected with you. And as we start a new school year, we have found that every year we have counselors that are moving and going to new schools, or other staff that are going to different locations. So we want to be sure that we have a good mailing list so that we can stay in touch with you. If you didn't receive this invite directly from us, if it was forwarded from someone else, which is always fine, you can always do that. But if that was the case, I would love it if you would reach out to me so that we can be sure that we get you on our mailing list so that you get our contact information and all of our invites and all of that directly. We'll also be sharing resources at the end, but one of the things up front we wanted you to know is that we would love for parents and students to stay up to date on the financial aid process and things connected with it by joining our email list or our texting list. And they can do either of those things, or both if they so desire, by going to famemaine.com/join. So we'll talk a little bit more about this and the ways that we share information at the end. But I just, in case you do need to leave us early, we just so appreciate if you can share that information with students and families so that they can join our lists and get information from us. Whoops, that is not what I meant to do. I apologize. Sorry about that. I clicked on a link. That's what you don't want to do, Mila. Okay, I'm going to reshare. Sorry about that, everybody. You know, some days just go the way they go, don't they? All right, bear with me. We'll get this show back on the road. There we go. Okay. Yeah, see, I clicked on the link. That's not what was intended. All right. So let's talk about StudentAid.gov accounts. And again, we used to refer to these as FSA IDs, but the federal government has started transitioning away from that language. So we're trying to do the same thing so that we're all using the same language. The StudentAid.gov account is the first step in the FAFSA filing process. So to create an account, individuals would go to StudentAid.gov. When they set up an account, they will use a username or provide a username and password. And the StudentAid.gov account is required to access the FAFSA and all federal student aid processes, and it also serves as the legal signature. So, for people who've been around for a while, you may recall that there used to be all of these different websites. You went one place to create your account, loan information was in another location, FAFSA was in a separate location. Now everything is under the StudentAid.gov umbrella. So, to access the StudentAid.gov information that lives there, all of these different, what used to be independent websites, every individual is going to need a StudentAid.gov account to get that specific information. So when creating a StudentAid.gov account, what an individual is going to do is they're going to provide their identifying information, including their social security number. And what happens is, as the account gets set up, the name, date of birth, and social security number are going to be matched against the Social Security Administration. The privacy piece is really important when it comes to StudentAid.gov. They take that very, very seriously. So they want to be sure that accounts that are being set up are for real people. So what they do is they take the information that the individual provides and they match that against the Social Security Administration. And so as long as that matches, the account gets created and can be used for all of these different purposes. Now, one thing that we're super excited about this year is that match with the Social Security Administration is now happening in real time. So this occurred in August. In August, we went from having the match take 2 or 3 days to the match now happening in real time. So this is going to be really important as we talk about FAFSA filing, because in the past it was kind of a two-step process or a delayed process where students or individuals would set up their account, they would create their account, but then they'd have to wait for it to get matched until we wanted them to do their FAFSA so that they could transfer tax information. That wouldn't work until their information was matched. Well, now when we're working with students, we can sit down and have them create their account, get it matched in real time, and then what that will mean is they can move on and do their FAFSA immediately. The other thing for those of you who have been working with students over the last couple of years is, I think what we have found one of the most challenging pieces is when someone makes a mistake when they set up their account. Maybe they transposed their social security number or something like that, but they went ahead and they started the FAFSA, and then the FAFSA had embedded in it that bad information. And trying to fix that has been super challenging. So what's really great now is that if it doesn't match, if they provided information, that wasn't accurate, they're going to have the ability to fix that immediately and then have that resubmitted to the Social Security Administration for that match. So we think this is a fabulous change that's going to make the process more streamlined, and it's going to make it easier, and it's going to reduce the number of errors going forward. Karen, I saw a hand raised. If whoever raised their hand, if you would just go ahead and maybe put something in the chat, if something's not working or you have a question for us, that would be super. Sometimes people do it by accident too. So when creating your StudentAid.gov account, individuals do need a unique email address. So the email address is a critical piece of setting up an account. It is a required piece of information and it cannot be duplicated. So like family members can't share. We can't both use the same email address. I learned this early on when I set up an account for my son, and I used my email address because I wanted to see what he received for communications. That was all well and good until I tried to set up an account for myself and realized you cannot use the same email address. So I'm going to stop. Just 1 second. Okay, that was just a question. Is there a difference? Will there be a student and parent separate account? Yes, we're going to get to that. I promise in just a moment. We'll talk about who needs them. I was afraid there was something technologically not working. So each individual has to have their own email address. Now, for students, we recommend that they do not use their high school email address. Instead, if they haven't already, we recommend that they set up a Gmail or a Hotmail or a Yahoo account, because they are going to need access to this account for years to come. So when they are applying for financial aid, they need to do that every single year. If they borrow student loans, they're going to need to get into this website, the StudentAid.gov site, for years and years to come. So they need to have an email address that they will maintain access to for all that whole period of time. So it's a great thing. It's nice and early. So it's great if students, if they don't already have one of those accounts, can set one up. And that's what they want to use when setting up their StudentAid.gov account. Now, if you've had a student who's already set up their StudentAid.gov account and they did use their high school email address, they can simply go in and they can update that. They can change that to a different email address once they have established that account. And we really, really encourage them to do that. Ideally, individuals will also provide their cell phone number. That is not a requirement. The email address is a requirement. The cell phone number is not. But unless there's a reason why they can't use their cell phone number, for example, maybe it's already in the system. Otherwise, we want them to list their cell phone number because in a moment, we're going to talk about two-step verification and what's required to get into the account on an ongoing basis. And so you'll see why having the mobile phone is going to be really critical if that's possible. The other thing individuals will do when they're setting up their StudentAid.gov account is they will select and answer 4 challenge questions so that if they forget their username or password, there's ways to retrieve that. So we do recommend that they select questions where the answers aren't going to change. Something like, I think there's one about your favorite vacation spot. That's great, except that may change over the period of, 3 or 4 or 5 years. So trying to use things that are going to not change over time is a tip that we recommend. I'm just looking at the question in here. Okay, great question. Question about whether the Social Security match implemented currently for the 25-26 year, or is it being rolled out for 26-27? The match happens when the accounts are created. So everybody creating an account now will have that match happen in real time. And that could be, we still have some students that still need to do their 25-26 FAFSA. And we have students obviously who will be filing their 26-27 FAFSA. So any individual who goes to create an account now will find that that match will be in real time. Yes, we are going to send all students to StudentAid.gov. That's where everything federal student aid related now lives, is under StudentAid.gov. So please do that. You can send students directly to the FAFSA. My personal preference is that we always have students log in directly to StudentAid.gov, and then once they're in that, they can select what they want, including the FAFSA. But I think it's a really good habit of, going to StudentAid.gov and then deciding exactly which task that they're taking on. But the FAFSA does live within that website now. All right, I told you I was going to talk a little bit about two-step verification. So I think we're all really familiar with two-step verification. We have to do it in a lot of different things. So basically, it's when we sign into a website, we have to get a code and we have to enter that code in order for us to proceed and actually be able to access the information in that site. So that is one of the pieces that's involved in the account creation. So when students are creating their account, or parents or any individual is creating their account, they are going to have to set up and establish that two-step verification. We recommend that they set up as many options as possible. So they can set up an authenticator app, or they can set up and connect their cell phone and their email address, which that's the one that's required. So basically what happens is when someone is setting up their account, they will see a screen like this where they will verify whichever of these options they want to use. Again, email is required. So when setting up an account, it's critical that students have access, or parents or individuals have access to their email, because they are going to need to access that email to get that code and put that into the system in order to have their StudentAid.gov account created. If they don't have access to that email, they're not going to be able to proceed, and they're going to have to start creating their account from scratch again. So we have some locations where we go and we do these events, and some of these buildings have cement walls, and it can be a little challenging to have, email access and cell phone access. So just think about that when you're working with students and families. They want to be in a location where they can access their email and where they can get a text so that they can get that code and they can establish this two-factor verification or two-step verification. Again, we want people to set up as many of these options as possible. They can add them later, but we want as many options as possible because you might be in a situation where you can't get a text or where you can't get your email. You want to have the option of the other available to you. So have them set up as many of these options as possible. Now, parents without an SSN can establish a StudentAid.gov account. For years, parents who didn't have a social security number could not create an account. I want to just say briefly before we talk more about parents that students, with a few rare exceptions that I'm not going to get into, students do have to have a social security number in order to be eligible for federal student aid. And students do have to be able to set up a StudentAid.gov account that includes a social security number. But parents do not. So parents do not have to have a social security number, nor do students have to be documented citizens in order for the student to be eligible for federal student aid. The student does indeed have to meet that criteria, but the parent does not. So now we have a scenario where parents, even when they don't have a social security number, can set up a StudentAid.gov account, and we need them to do that so that they can finish off the parent section of the FAFSA. Now, this process is similar as to those who do have an SSN, except there's an additional step at the very end where they need to verify their identity. So as they go through this process, you can see that down here, instead of entering their social security number, they can click on this and it says, what if I don't have a social security number? And then what they can do is they're going to see that it's just going to double check that they really meant to click on that and that they truly do not have a social security number. Because what we don't want to have happen here is people who just don't remember their social security number to click on this. So they're really clear that the only people who should be indicating that they don't have a social security number are people who truly don't have one, not people who just can't remember theirs. Okay. So if a student is setting up their account, they can't remember their social security number, they don't have access to it, they need to just hold tight and wait until they do. They would not want to go down this pathway. But for parents who don't have a social security number, this is exactly what they would do. Again, the process is going to be very similar. They're going to provide their email, their cell phone number. They're going to answer their challenge questions. But one of the big differences is at the end, they still need to have their identity verified. We talked a moment ago about the fact that for individuals who have a social security number, their identity gets verified due to that match with the Social Security Administration. If you don't have a social security number, you can't get verified through the Social Security Administration. So it needs to be done differently for these individuals. So how the process works is if there is enough information available from TransUnion, it's one of those large credit bureaus, they have all sorts of data on all sorts of people, they will be asked knowledge-based questions. So I think many of us have experienced this. If I go to try to get a copy of my tax transcript, for example, one of the things the IRS will do is they'll ask me some questions like, what type of car did I have in 1986, or who is my mortgage through, or things of that nature. And those are basically questions that help them verify that I am who I say I am. So parents who don't have a social, if that sort of information is on file, they will be asked those questions. And if they answer them correctly, then their identity is considered to be verified. I'm going to tell you this process has not worked perfectly, and federal student aid still is working on some things related to this, because what we found is that there were many people who there's not enough information for them to get asked those questions. So what happens in that case is an account still can be created though. So even under those circumstances, an account can be created and the parents can use their StudentAid.gov account, that username and password, to access the parent section of the FAFSA. Okay. I think what we will be seeing down the road is some sort of verification still needing to be done for those people who can't meet that TransUnion requirement. You may recall for a period of time, they were having people send in documentation. They stopped doing that at the end of last year for a whole variety of reasons. So basically, they are letting parents go through, even if they haven't been verified, so that they can fill out the student section of the FAFSA. Individuals who don't have a social security number, though, will never have their tax information transferred from the IRS, even if there is some tax information on file for them. So those individuals are always going to have to answer their tax questions manually. Now, we're not going to go today into the FAFSA questions beyond what I have just said, but do please join us for our Wednesday webinar next month, where we will do a deeper dive into the FAFSA and questions, and we'll talk about how tax information gets transferred and when it does and when it doesn't. So more to come on that next month. But for now, we want people to set up their StudentAid.gov accounts. We want every individual who needs one, which is what we're going to talk about next, to get this done as soon as possible. So, who needs an account? Every contributor to a FAFSA needs to have their own StudentAid.gov account. Now, contributor has nothing to do with who actually contributes to paying for higher ed. It's just simply who contributes information to the FAFSA. So a contributor is defined as anyone who is providing information on the FAFSA and who is required to provide consent. And what consent is it's allowing the IRS to disclose their federal tax information. And the Department of Education uses their federal tax information and they disclose it to the colleges. Okay, so when people file their FAFSA, within the student section and within the parent section, the individual is going to have to provide consent. And that's going to allow the FAFSA to access the IRS, see if there's any tax information on file, and if there is, transfer it back into the FAFSA. I got to tell you, this has worked really well, very smoothly. We've had great results with this enhancement that took place a couple of years ago. But the key piece is that people have to say yes to providing that information. They have to consent, because if individuals do not consent to this, the student is not eligible for federal student aid. Okay. So the student is always a contributor. So the student, that is just a given. So every student out there needs to have a StudentAid.gov account. But there are other possible contributors depending on the student's dependency status and their situation. So let's do a little bit of a deeper dive or breakdown into the details of who the other contributors might be. And we're going to focus specifically on dependent students right now. So if we've got students, let's just say they're seniors in high school for the purposes of this discussion, and their parents are married to each other and filed a joint 2024 tax return. Quick aside, we're doing the 26-27 FAFSA soon. That is using information from 2024. So if their parents are married and filed a joint tax return, it's going to use the information for both parents. It's going to use the income and assets for both parents. But only one parent will actually need to have a StudentAid.gov account. They can both get one. There's nothing that prevents both of them from getting one, but only one will have to get one. And this all comes back to there's a direct link between who needs an account and tax filing status. So my husband and I, for example, file a joint tax return. So if I'm doing a FAFSA for our kiddos, only I need to have a StudentAid.gov account, because when I go in to provide consent and agree to have our tax information transferred over to the FAFSA, I can provide that consent on behalf of my husband. Because we're married and filed a joint return, I can grant consent on behalf of him, and he can provide consent on behalf of me. Okay, so parents married, joint tax return, only one parent has to have a StudentAid.gov account, but it will provide information for both parents. But let's just say the scenario is that the parents are married and they filed taxes separately for some reason. Or we might have a scenario where the parents actually live together, but they aren't married. So because they're not married, they can't file a joint tax return. In that scenario, information for both parents will still be required, but both parents will need their own StudentAid.gov account. And that's because if my husband and I file taxes separately, I cannot log in and grant consent to have his tax information transferred because we filed separately. So he would have to log in and grant consent to have his tax information transferred. Okay. So when talking with students and they're asking you who needs to have one of these accounts, if we're talking about the parents, one of the first things we have to do is establish what the parent's marital status is, getting very personal very quickly, right? And then determining what the tax filing status was. Those two things are both needed to determine for sure who needs an account. But I will say again, there is never any harm in creating a StudentAid.gov account, even for married couples who file joint returns. If you want the flexibility for either of them to be able to access the parent section of the FAFSA, either one can do that. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into the scenario where the parents are divorced or separated or never married and don't live in the same household. So we have a step that we have to do first before we can figure out who needs a StudentAid.gov account. And the first thing we have to do is figure out which parent is the parent on the FAFSA. So the way that the FAFSA works is that parents are divorced, for example. The parent who provides the majority of the student's financial support, it has done so for the last 12 months, is going to be the parent on the FAFSA. For FAFSA purposes, the other parent does not need to provide any information on the FAFSA at all. Not only do they not have to sign in, none of their information is going to be counted when determining eligibility for federal student aid and other types of aid. Okay, so the first step when parents are divorced is to figure out who is going to be that parent on the FAFSA. Again, it's the parent who provides the most financial support. This can be a little bit gray, we know. Oftentimes, if a student is living with one parent most of the time, by virtue of that parent providing food and housing and all of the things that go with that, they probably are the ones that are providing the most financial support. But child support would also be factored in. So if you ever have any questions about determining that, we can help with that and walk through a series of questions to help students and parents figure out which parent should be the parent on the FAFSA. Okay, so that's first. So once we've determined which parent is the parent that's going to be on the FAFSA, we know that parent wants to have a StudentAid.gov account. They're going to need a StudentAid.gov account so they can log into the parent section and complete their questions. Now, the FAFSA, and I know people don't always love this, does want to know if that parent, the one that provides the most financial support, is remarried. And if that parent is remarried, and again, the critical date is on the day the FAFSA is filed, not when taxes were filed. It's on the day the FAFSA was filed. The parent is remarried on that day, then information for their spouse will also be required, just like with married couples always. So it's going to look at both parents' income information. Now, whether or not the step parent needs their own StudentAid.gov account, guess what it comes back to? It comes back to tax filing status. So we need to look back to 2024. And just like we talked about in that first scenario, did they file a joint tax return? If in 2024 they filed a joint tax return, let's say they've been, married for several years, they filed a joint tax return in 2024, then only the parent that we identified as providing more than half support would need a StudentAid.gov account. But if we had a scenario where, let's say over the summer, say mom got remarried, her spouse's information is going to be required on the FAFSA. And because they didn't file a joint tax return in 2024, her spouse is going to need their own StudentAid.gov account. Okay. So that's what we use as the criteria for determining who needs an account. What's the marital status of the parents? And then what's the tax filing status of the parents? Okay. Any questions about any of that? It's very similar, though. I talked about dependent students, but it's very similar for independent students who are married. If an independent student has gotten married, then their spouse's information is going to be required on the FAFSA. Whether or not they need to have a StudentAid.gov account, meaning their spouse, so that they can log in and provide consent, is all going to come back to what was the tax filing status in 2024. If they were married in 2024 and provided a joint tax return or filed a joint tax return, then only the student needs to log in. But if they were not married, for example, so they couldn't file a joint tax return in 2024, then their spouse will need to have a StudentAid.gov account and log in and provide consent. I'm hoping no questions because it was clear. But if not, please add them into the chat or the Q&A. All right. StudentAid.gov accounts can be created anytime. As we talked about, the account data must be matched with the Social Security Administration. And why this is key comes back to that tax information, right? StudentAid.gov or federal student aid wants to be sure that tax information is only being transferred for those particular people. So they want to verify people's identity to be sure that when they do transfer tax information, that is indeed that actual individual. So that's now happening, as we said last month, in real time. So that is super. And that means that individuals, when they create their StudentAid.gov account, can immediately file the FAFSA. So this is super because for the last 2 years, we've been doing kind of like pre-events or talking with students and families about getting their StudentAid.gov accounts set up ahead of time. Because if they came to a session and they hadn't done anything, we'd be really hesitant to have them start their FAFSA without their information being matched because it might not match. There might be an issue there, but additionally, it would mean that their tax information was not going to transfer over automatically and they were going to have to enter it manually. But now with this real-time match, we can do the account creation and we can file the FAFSA all in one sitting. So we're really, really excited about that. And we do think this is going to make the process a lot easier. So we have worksheets to help with this. So we have one worksheet that is specifically for those who don't have a Social Security number. So for those parents in that scenario. But this other one here is the one that you're probably going to use most often. It has information on creating an account. You can click on the QR code. It will take you to our website with the details. Student information on the front and then parent information on the back. If people do write down information, we need to be sure people have access to this information. I find that I write things down, but we do want to keep it in a secure location. So you want to keep it, in maybe where you keep your taxes or something like that. Sometimes people will take a picture of it, so they will have it available on their phone, but you want to make sure that the phone is password protected. So just be very cautious with this information because it provides access to a lot of different pieces of information. So people are going to go ahead and create their account. I had a thought and it's gone, so I might come back to it. Okay. I have a terrible headache today. I'm going to just be perfectly honest with all of you. I feel better than I did yesterday, but I am not totally 100% on my game today. So thanks for being here with me. Okay. So this is what the screens look like. So on a phone, if someone wants to create an account, they're going to click on the little person, and that's how they would create their account. Otherwise, they would log into StudentAid.gov and create their account here. Once they've set up their account, when they log into StudentAid.gov, they're going to have access to all of these things. So yes, you can shortcut someone and go directly to the FAFSA, but they're still going to have to log in because ultimately the FAFSA lives on this website with all of this other information. So I just like the habit of students and individuals going to StudentAid.gov, logging in, seeing their dashboard, and then deciding what steps they're ready to take, filing the FAFSA, updating the FAFSA, checking loan status, or whatever might be the case. All right, now I'm going to make a transition. So we've got our students setting up their accounts. We've got them identifying who else needs to set up an account, and they're getting those things done. Even though we can do a FAFSA the same day we set up an account, let's just kind of break these tasks apart and make everything not seem so overwhelming. So we can get those set up now. That would be super. But one of the other big things that we want to think about is the list of schools on the FAFSA. So when students are filling out their FAFSA in the student section, because keep in mind the FAFSA now is roles-based, there's a student section, and for dependent students, there's a parent section. Well, it's within the student section where they list all of the schools that they want to receive their FAFSA data. So they have to list at least one school in that section. But we recommend that students list all of the schools that they are considering. Okay, there's no downside to listing a school. If they never apply to that school, it's no big deal. The school will eventually just delete their data. Okay, so it's a much better scenario to have them list any school that's a possibility because now they can list up to 20 schools. So there's plenty of room to list all of those schools with a possibility. We are really encouraging students and families to use net price calculators to determine, which schools look like they might be a good fit for them and to get a sense of the cost. What we want to be sure of at the end of the day, and I know not everyone loves net price calculators, but what we want to be sure of at the end of the day is that students have a variety of schools that can be affordable to them. So sometimes what we've had happen in the past is I remember students specifically last year who only applied to two schools. They were two out-of-state private schools that didn't have great financial aid, and they didn't realize that. So by the time they received their financial aid offers, they'd only applied to those two schools. They'd missed the deadlines at other schools. We just want students to start getting a sense of how affordable individual schools are. We always do say that with net price calculators, they are just an estimate. They are not something you ever want to make a decision based on, but they are a piece of information that can be helpful. Sometimes they're helpful because they show that it's not going to be super affordable, and it results in a student saying, you know what, I need to add a couple of other schools to my list. So whatever the outcome is, we do think that's an important tool. Now, people want to be watching to see if their calculators at their particular schools have been updated. They should be asking for the most up to date. They would be asking for 2024 income information. So if it's asking for, 2 years worth of information ago, 2022, that's a sign that probably their net price calculators have not been updated recently. Here's another thing I would love to have students do to help them build their list is I would love to have them use the Big Future website and investigate and search for schools with affordability in mind. As you all know, schools vary tremendously in the amount of financial aid that they offer and the amount of need that they are able to meet. So schools all start from basically the same starting point when they award financial aid. They say, what does it cost to go here? They build a cost of attendance, tuition fees, housing, food, books, supplies. And then they subtract from that student aid index, that output from the FAFSA, that number. So they take cost of attendance minus the student aid index, and that's how much need the student has. Now, in a perfect world, every school would meet 100% of that need. We know that we do not live in a perfect world and that every school meets 100% of need. So what we want to be able to find are schools that still do a good job of meeting need. So the Big Future website can help do that. So here's what one of the screenshots from Big Future looks like. So students can search for schools based on the criteria that's important to them. In this database lives about 4,200 schools. So there's a ton of schools in here. So the goal is to find the schools that are a good match for students. So major obviously is going to be important. Location might be important. I think size is important. I think some students know they'll thrive at a smaller school where others want to be at a really large school. So they can click on any of these attributes to use as a filter to get that 4,200 down to a manageable number. One of the things I would like to have them include when they're doing this search is the affordability piece, okay? So if they click on affordability, what it allows them to do is to click on, say, for example, 100%, and they can see schools that meet 100% of need. To be honest, there aren't many of them. Okay, there are a few, but there aren't many. So when my kids were going through this process, I had them click to start, just to start, on 90%. And what that would do is that would give us a list of schools that met their major requirements, location, size, whatever was important, but also seemed to be a school that on average did a pretty good job of meeting the need that students have. You can back that off a little bit further to 75% to widen that search a little bit more. But I think it's just a really important piece of the puzzle that we want students and families thinking about is making sure that they're applying to schools that meet all of their needs, ideally, including the affordability piece, and always having a financial aid safety school on their list. So just like we talk about that on the admission side, on the financial aid side, we want there to be a school listed that they can afford, even if the financial aid isn't great. Maybe that's community college for some. Maybe that's one of our public four-year institutions for others. So this is the things I think about when building a list of schools, and I know all of you deal with this all the time. So I'd love it if you could encourage students to use this website if you don't already. Kara, do we have a question?
Yes, we do. Okay. So you said accounts can be created at any time. Can
Mhm.
filing happen now, or is the start date in October like before?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's where things stand. I was wondering if anyone was going to ask, and I was going to talk about it at the very end. But so the FAFSA will be available on October 1st. We feel very, very confident of that. They've been doing beta testing. They started doing beta testing in August. They finished round one. Now, round two, people can apply to be in the beta testing. I did that. It was really easy, and I was able to get in and access the FAFSA for the upcoming year. A little birdie has indicated that the FAFSA may be available before October 1st. So stay tuned because we might, as soon as we know, we will put out an announcement. But I do think there is the possibility that the FAFSA will be available before October 1st. That being said, I don't think people need to rush to get it done immediately. I'd love for students to get their FAFSA filed in the months of October or early November. I think that's great. That's plenty early. It's earlier that's even been available for the last 2 years, and that will set the student up well. So yes, you may hear that the FAFSA is available before October 1st. Those early birds who want to get it done can go ahead and do that. But even those students who wait until October 1st, or November 1st are still going to be in really good shape because it's still very early and priority filing deadlines will not have hit yet. Okay. I think what federal student aid is trying to do is they said to us in a meeting we were in recently is they're just trying to spread out when people apply because what can happen sometimes is if you have this one opening date as we've experienced in past years, way back, is that, on October 1st, everything would be so busy. The system might slow down a little bit. Customer service would have challenges with, how many questions they were getting. So I think they're just trying to spread out the applications over a longer period of time rather than having people focus on that one critical day. Okay, thanks for that question. That's great. I'm just going to look here. Can students add schools after they submitted their FAFSA? What if they are unsure of the schools of interest this early in the fall? So, yes, students can go back in and they can add additional schools. Now, one thing I do want to note is that the student section is where schools are listed. And I mentioned that earlier, but why I want to say it again is because, for example, as a parent who might have hovered a little bit, I could not log into the parent section of the FAFSA and add a school. The schools can only be added by the student within the student section of the FAFSA. But yes, they indeed can add additional schools. So they can go back in anytime and add additional schools. So I'm a big fan. They have to list at least one. And I'm a big fan of listing any that are on the radar. But maybe there's a school that's not on the radar at all. And it's over Thanksgiving dinner that people are having conversations and the student says, hey, I think I'd like to add that school. They certainly can go in and do that. And that's what we want them to do. And then they will be sent, that school will be sent the FAFSA data. Okay. All right. Let me just make sure. Great. Okay. All right. So I now want to share a couple of resources that we would love to have you share. And I will tell you that I will link directly to these resources when I send the follow-up email. But this is our path to affording higher education. And so we'd love to get this information out to families. It has a couple of key pieces in it. It talks about the piecemeal approach to paying for higher ed. We think that's incredibly important, not relying on only one source of funding, financial aid, savings, scholarships, payment plans, things like that. And we also have this conversation starter. I think one of the things we see sometimes is a disconnect between parents and students and what's affordable and what's not affordable, or what's the next step or not the next step. So talking about these things, I think, can help people get on the same page. And I think if they can do this in the fall, it's going to make everything that happens in the spring a lot easier. Another resource that we'd like to share is our pay publication. So our pay publication has a whole bunch of financial aid information in it, but it also has a tracking sheet for people to keep track of deadlines and forms, as well as checklists. So we'd love to have you share that with students. We have it on our website available digitally. We sent out a whole bunch of toolkits or mailings with samples of our publications. You can go to our website and order as many as you want for free, and we will send them your way and you can distribute them to your students if you would like to do that. And then there's also the Get Ready handout. So the Get Ready handout is something that we distribute when we do financial aid information sessions so that people kind of know what to expect. This has been updated to reflect the fact that StudentAid.gov accounts can be created and matched in real time. So we took out the kind of, you got to get this done super early. Early is still good, but we want to be sure people know they can do everything theoretically on the same day. The other thing we did update here, and I don't know whether you've heard about this, but I certainly will be sharing it next month when we talk about the FAFSA, is we have updated the asset section to reflect the fact that small family-owned businesses with fewer than 100 full-time employees are now an exempt asset again, as are family farms and family-owned fishing businesses. So this is really good news. For 2 years, we had this scenario where there wasn't an exemption for these small businesses, but that exemption is now back in place. It happened as a result of HR1 that passed over the summer. So this has been updated, and the FAFSA has been updated to reflect that fact as well. So that's really good news for those families out there who have a small family-owned business. No longer is it going to be an asset that they need to list on the FAFSA. The other things that are on our Get Ready form, and I'll include this link, are is this flow chart that can just help. And we talked a minute ago about contributors and who needs to have an account. This flow chart kind of helps with that. So as that can be a reference. And then here we have the information that determines whether or not a student is going to be considered independent automatically. And so this is important to know because sometimes we have students in difficult situations. And the reality is their circumstances might be really difficult, but maybe getting the FAFSA done is going to be way easier than they think it's going to be. So a student is considered independent and doesn't have to provide any parent information if they can answer yes to any one of these questions. Okay, so I'll just let you look at these for a moment. You're probably familiar with them. Basically, they're 24, they're married, they're a grad student, they've been in the military, they are in the military. But then there are a couple of other questions that I think people don't always realize. So students who have, since they were 13, if they were in foster care or a ward of the court, at any time since turning 13, even if they are not now, are automatically considered independent. If a student is in the legal guardianship of someone other than their biological parents, for example, their grandparents or a sibling, they're automatically considered independent. If they're an emancipated minor, they're automatically considered independent. And if they are homeless or at risk of being homeless anytime after July 1st of 2025, they also can be considered independent. So let me show you a little bit about how that's going to work on the FAFSA in case you get questions from individuals. So as students answer questions, some of these questions are needed exactly to determine dependency status. So if a student is married, they're automatically going to be considered independent. If they are pursuing a graduate degree, they're automatically going to be considered independent. Or if they meet any of this criteria that we just talked about. Okay? So any of those things are going to make that student independent. That said, I do want to just talk a little bit more about the homeless question because that was not on the last slide. If they say none of these things apply to me, and they will then see this question that asks them about homelessness. So at any time on or after July 1st of 2025, was the student unaccompanied, and that's critical, unaccompanied, and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. So unaccompanied is critical because if you've got a student, for example, who's living in a shelter, a homeless shelter with their parent, they are not unaccompanied. They'd still have to fill out the FAFSA and provide parent information. Likely be very needy, but they would still have to walk through that process. So this is looking at students who are unaccompanied and are either homeless currently or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. If that is the student scenario, and a lot of you, at your high school may have your individual who is the homeless liaison. If your school has already indicated that, that's going to make this process really simple for the student because the next question that student sees is if they say yes, basically, I am in that scenario where I'm either homeless or at risk and I'm unaccompanied, then it's going to ask them if someone can document that. So again, most common what we see is that can the student's high school or school district homeless liaison designate that? Can they verify, or have they already determined that the student is homeless? If they say yes to this question, so if you've done that for a student, they can answer yes to this question, and that student is automatically going to be considered independent. Okay. Let's say that you're not working in a school, or you're at a school where they haven't made this determination. Maybe the student doesn't want people to know what's going on. So they say, "Yes, I am in this scenario," but no one can document that. What happens here? If they say none of this applies, so basically none of these identified organizations or people can verify that I am homeless, then the student is considered provisionally independent, which means that they need to, they can continue to file their FAFSA without parent information, but they will have to follow up with the college. They have to follow up with the college and have a conversation with them about their situation. So unless they do that, they're not going to be eligible for financial aid. So that is a critical piece that they need to do. Okay. So documentation, automatically independent. If someone can document that, if no one can, then they work with the school. And then there's one more pathway for students with unusual circumstances. And that is if we have students who can't answer yes to anything we've talked about, but maybe what they're doing is they are living with someone. And so they are not homeless, but they're not living with their parents, maybe because there's been abuse. Maybe they have a parent who's incarcerated and the other person cannot be located. If it's not safe for a student to be living with their parents, then we don't want them going through a situation where they have to get FAFSA information in order to apply for financial aid. So the process has been built that students who do have unusual circumstances can indicate that yes, they do have unusual circumstances, and they will be like the homeless student who can't document, who says they don't have someone who can document their situation. They will then be considered provisionally independent, finish off their FAFSA, but need to follow up with the financial aid office in order to work with them to determine whether or not they can be considered independent. In the old days, we called this a dependency override. We now refer to it as unusual circumstances. Now, this is not a case where parents just don't want to file the FAFSA. These are for these really unusual circumstances where there's a lot more going on. If you are ever in a situation where you have a student that has a difficult situation, it's a little bit different. You're not sure how they will approach the FAFSA or how the FAFSA is going to work for them, please reach out to us and we can help walk through these scenarios and figure out how the student should proceed. All right, and then the last thing I just want to touch on are some resources that are available first for you and then next for your students. So I would love to have you at your convenience go to famaine.com/educators. That's a page that's just for all of you who are working with students. On that page, you are going to find our professional development and training. That is going to include everything from our upcoming Wednesday webinars, which are held on the second Wednesday of every month, as well as other trainings. You should have received an invite. If you haven't, email me and we'll get you on our mailing list for FA 101, Financial Aid 101. We do our big in-person event in the spring, but this fall we're doing a virtual event. Don't fear the FAFSA. We're doing it on Halloween, where we're going to focus in on the FAFSA and financial aid. And so we'd love to have you join us. We have sent information out about that, so you are able to register either by going to our website, famaine.com/events, or by emailing me, and we'll get you that information sent to you. We also have Tuesday Tips, which is a monthly newsletter that focuses on things related to affording higher education. And then some other things I'd love to have you check out when you have the time. One is the FAFSA prototype. So if you're really anxious to walk through a FAFSA, the prototype is how you can do that. The prototype has a variety of scenarios where you can go in and indicate that you're a parent or a student, that you are this scenario or that scenario, and see what the flow of the FAFSA is, what screens come up, what questions are asked. So I think that's a great tool if you want to get familiar with the FAFSA a little bit earlier. There's also a link to the Federal Student Aid Estimator. This is where people can go in and provide some basic information and get an estimated student aid index, as well as see whether or not they're eligible for a Pell Grant. There's also the Pell Grant lookup chart. A couple of years ago, they changed to basing maximum Pell and minimum Pels based on family income. So we can tell people now, if your family has an income of this amount, you're going to be eligible for a Pell Grant. So those charts are on that page. And then there are a slew of other resources, including the FAFSA screenshots. So Federal Student Aid has shared screenshots of the upcoming FAFSA. There are like 200 different screenshots. Now, students will never see all of those, but they've done every single scenario out there. So if you want to see some of those screenshots, you can do that by going to that page on our website. And lastly, for students and families, we'd love it if you would share these resources. We have both in-person and virtual financial aid information sessions. This is where we provide an overview of the process and talk about the FAFSA specifically, as well as what happens after the FAFSA is filed. Please share that information with students. We'd love to have them attend a session. Students can, again, we talked about this at the very beginning, students and parents can join our texting list and or our email list. What I didn't say at the beginning is we have incentivized this because we would love for people to do this so that we can stay in contact with them. And any members of the class of 26, whether it be parent or guardian or the student themselves, if they sign up, we're automatically going to enter them into a drawing for one of actually 3 $1,000 scholarships. So we were thrilled that last year people did this. And in May, we drew 3 winners, and all 3 of them are currently enrolled in college of some form of higher ed and are receiving that $1,000 scholarship. So please spread the word about that. We also have a Facebook page, so we'd love to have parents join that or caregivers. It's not for students. It's a safe space where parents and caregivers can talk about the challenges of paying for higher ed, and we share tips and resources. And then last but not least, we do have one-on-one financial aid coaching. So anybody can go and sign up for a 30-minute Zoom appointment with us. And these are available all year long. And whether a family wants to talk about planning to pay for higher ed, they want to talk about actually doing their FAFSA, they want to compare financial aid offers, they want to figure out how to pay the rest of the bill, whatever families want to talk about or individuals want to talk about, we will chat with them about that and provide information and resources. So with that, that is what I had for today. Karen, were there any other questions?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Any questions, anybody? I'll hold on for just one quick second and see if anyone puts anything else in the chat. But if not, again, we will get this out to you, this link to you and these additional resources in the next couple of days. Well, thank you very much. Great. I'm glad that people who are new to the field have joined us. Keep coming back, reach out to us directly and let us know how we can be of assistance. All right. Well, I think, Karen, we will call it a day then. So thank you again so much, everyone. I'm wishing you a
Thanks,
wonderful
Mila.
day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.